What if I told you that the man who publicly adored his wife, who stood by her through years of fertility struggles, who built a billion-dollar empire with her, was secretly poisoning her? Madison Reynolds thought she was losing her mind. Failed pregnancy after failed pregnancy, memory gaps, paranoid thoughts that everyone dismissed as stress. But when she overheard a conversation about divorce papers she never knew existed, she realized the horrifying truth: her loving husband had been systematically destroying her for 3 years. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about a woman who discovered that sometimes the person trying to save you is actually the one trying to destroy you. And what she did next will shock you. Madison's journey from victim to victor proves that even the most sophisticated manipulation can be overcome. If this story opened your eyes to the reality of psychological abuse, hit that like button to help others discover it too. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced gaslighting? And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because next week I'm diving into another incredible true story of someone who refused to stay silent. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Madison Reynolds adjusted her Hermes scarf as she stepped out of the black Tesla onto the red carpet. Camera flashes exploded around her and her husband Connor as they made their entrance to the annual Tech Leaders Gala. To the world watching, they were America's power couple. The small-town teacher who married a struggling entrepreneur and helped build a $2 billion empire. "Madison Connor, over here!" Photographers shouted as Connor's arm tightened possessively around her waist. His smile was perfect, practiced from years of magazine covers and television interviews. Madison's smile felt more forced tonight, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. "You look stunning, darling," Connor whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "Forbes wants to feature us again next month. The journalist specifically requested to interview you about your role in the company culture." Madison nodded, remembering how she'd spent countless 18-hour days in their garage back in 2008, cold calling potential investors while Connor coded. She'd been the one to secure their first major funding round, convincing billionaire venture capitalist Robert Chen that Reynolds Tech had something special. She'd designed their employee retention programs, their charitable giving strategy, their entire public relations approach. "Mrs. Reynolds," a reporter called out, "what's your secret to balancing marriage and business success?" Madison stepped forward, her voice steady and warm. "Communication and shared vision. Connor and I built this company together from nothing. We understand that behind every successful venture, there's a team working toward the same goal." Connor's grip on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly. Later, she would recognize this as a warning sign. Tonight, she dismissed it as affection. The ballroom was magnificent crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables decorated with white orchids and gold accents. Madison had personally overseen every detail of tonight's charity auction, which would raise money for STEM education in underserved communities. It was her passion project, one that connected her to her roots as a teacher in rural Ohio. "The Reynoldses have donated $500,000 tonight," the auctioneer announced. "Their commitment to education continues to inspire us all." Applause filled the room. Madison felt a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. This was why she'd worked so hard, why she'd sacrificed so much. Making a difference mattered more than the money. But as they returned to their table, she noticed Connor scrolling through his phone, his jaw tense. When she leaned over to see what had captured his attention so completely, he quickly switched to his email. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just work stuff. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow?" His smile returned instantly, but something in his eyes had shifted. "Dance with me." They moved to the dance floor, swaying to the orchestra's gentle waltz. Madison felt herself relaxing against Connor's chest, remembering why she'd fallen in love with him 15 years ago. He'd been different then, vulnerable, ambitious but kind, grateful for her belief in his dreams. "I love you," she whispered, meaning it completely. "I love you too," he replied, but his attention was already drifting toward his business associates across the room. As the evening wound down, Madison excused herself to the ladies' room. In the mirror, she studied her reflection, 35 years old, successful beyond her wildest dreams, married to a man the world envied. So why did she feel so empty lately? Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Amy. "Saw the pictures from tonight. You look beautiful but tired. Everything okay?" Madison stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, Just busy. Talk soon. But as she returned to find Connor deep in conversation with their company's CFO, apparently having forgotten she existed, Madison wondered if Amy had seen something she herself was only beginning to acknowledge. The golden cage of their success was beautiful, prestigious, and envied by millions. It was also a cage. 3 months later, Madison sat in Dr. Patricia Hernandez's fertility clinic, trying not to cry as the doctor explained why their latest round of IVF had failed. It was their 8th attempt in 3 years, and each failure felt like another piece of her heart breaking away. I know this is disappointing, Dr. Hernandez said gently, but we have options. Your hormone levels are responding well to treatment, and there's no medical reason why this shouldn't work eventually. Madison nodded, though the word eventually felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She was 35. Connor was 41. They'd been trying for 5 years, and each passing month felt like stolen time. How much longer should we keep trying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's really up to you and Connor. Some couples continue for years. Others decide to explore alternatives after a certain point. There's no right answer. When Madison arrived home to their penthouse apartment, Connor was already there, which surprised her. He'd been working late most nights recently, preparing for a major product launch that would either secure Reynolds Tech's position as an industry leader or cost them everything. How did it go today? He asked, but his tone was distracted, clinical. He was reviewing financial documents spread across their dining room table. Another negative. The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd run out of ways to express this particular devastation. Connor looked up briefly, his expression shifting to what she'd started thinking of as his concerned husband face. The same expression he used during media interviews when discussing their charitable work. I'm sorry, honey. I know how much this means to you. He stood and embraced her, but she could feel his impatience, his desire to return to his spreadsheets. Maybe we should take a break from the treatments. The stress might be making it harder. Madison pulled away. Stung. The stress isn't coming from the treatments. Connor, it's coming from feeling like I'm going through this alone. That's not fair. I've been to every appointment I could make it to. 3 out of 15. Press. The number hung in the air between them. Connor's jaw tightened, a warning sign Madison had learned to recognize over the years. I'm building something important here. Madison, something that will support our family for generations. I thought you understood that. I do understand. I helped build it. Remember. But what's the point of building a legacy if we don't have a family to pass it on to? Connor's phone buzzed, and despite everything they were discussing, he glanced at it. Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who is that? Sarah. Something urgent came up with the Patterson account. Sarah Chen was Connor's executive assistant, a brilliant Stanford MBA who joined the company 6 months ago. Madison had interviewed her personally, impressed by her strategic thinking and work ethic. Can it wait an hour? Connor hesitated just long enough for Madison to notice. I should probably call her back. This deal could make or break our fourth quarter. Madison watched him walk into his office and close the door. Through the glass, she could see him on the phone, but his body language didn't suggest urgent business. He was relaxed, leaning back in his chair, even laughing at something Sarah had said. That night, Madison lay awake staring at the ceiling while Connor slept soundly beside her. Something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. Though she couldn't identify exactly what or when, they still attended events together, still presented a united front to the world, still shared the same bed. But they'd stopped sharing their fears, their dreams, their real selves. The next morning, Madison decided to surprise Connor at the office with lunch from his favorite restaurant. When she arrived at Reynolds Tech's gleaming headquarters, she found Sarah Chen in Connor's office, sitting unusually close to him as they reviewed documents on his computer. Something about their body language made Madison pause in the doorway. Madison, Connor's voice was overly bright. This is unexpected. I brought lunch. She held up the bag from the Italian place where they'd had their first date. But I can come back if you're busy. Actually, we just finished, Sarah said smoothly, gathering her papers. I'll let you two enjoy your lunch. As Sarah left, Madison noticed the subtle way her fingers brushed against Connor's arm. It was such a small gesture. It could have been accidental, but Madison had been married for 15 years. She knew the difference between accidental and intentional. "How's the Patterson account going?" Madison asked as they unpacked their food. "Good. Sarah's been instrumental in closing the deal. She really understands the client's needs." "She seems very dedicated." "She is. She was here until almost midnight last night, helping me prepare for the presentation." Madison nodded, forcing herself to keep eating even though the food now tasted like cardboard. Connor had told her he was in back-to-back video conferences until 11 p.m. But if Sarah was there until midnight, working closely with him— "Connor," she began carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about taking a break from the fertility treatments." "Oh, good, I think that's wise. But I want us to go to counseling instead. I think we need to reconnect before we can bring a child into our relationship." Connor's chewing slowed. "Counseling. Couples therapy, just to help us communicate better, get back on the same page about our priorities." For a moment, something flickered across Connor's face, fear, annoyance. But then his media-trained smile returned. "Of course, if that's what you need, we'll make it work." Madison felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. Maybe Sarah Chen was just a dedicated employee, and Madison's suspicions were the product of grief and hormone treatments and too many lonely nights. Maybe everything would be okay. She had no idea that Connor was already calculating how to use her vulnerability against her. Dr. Michael Ross had an office designed to put people at ease: soft lighting, comfortable leather chairs, and walls lined with books about relationships and healing. Madison had chosen him carefully, researching marriage counselors for weeks before finding someone who specialized in high-achieving couples facing fertility struggles. "So what brings you both here today?" Dr. Ross asked during their first session. Madison glanced at Connor, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been trying to have children for 5 years. The fertility treatments have been challenging, and I feel like we've grown apart. Connor's so focused on work, and I'm so focused on getting pregnant, that we've stopped being partners." "Connor, how would you describe the situation?" Connor leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Madison's been under enormous stress. The hormone treatments, the disappointments, it's been heartbreaking to watch. I've been throwing myself into work partly as a coping mechanism, but also because I want to make sure we're financially secure enough to provide the best possible care if we do get pregnant. Maybe I've been too focused on solving the problem instead of just being present with the emotions." Madison felt a flutter of hope. This was the Connor she'd fallen in love with: self-aware, emotionally intelligent, willing to take responsibility. "Madison, how does that land for you?" It helps to hear him acknowledge that. "I don't need him to fix everything. I just need him to be there with me." Over the following weeks, their sessions became a bright spot in Madison's week. Connor seemed genuinely committed to improving their communication. He was present, engaged, asking thoughtful questions about her feelings. For the first time in months, they were having real conversations about something other than business or medical appointments. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Ross said," Connor told her one evening as they walked through Central Park, "about how I use work to avoid difficult emotions. You're right that I haven't been present for this journey." Madison squeezed his hand. "I appreciate you saying that. And I know I've been so focused on having a baby that I've probably made you feel like you're not enough for me anymore. Are we enough for each other, even if the fertility treatments never work?" The question caught Madison off guard. "Of course we are. I mean, I hope we have children. But I married you, not the idea of you as a father." Connor stopped walking and turned to face her. "I love you, Madison. I know I haven't been great at showing it lately, but building this life with you has been the most meaningful thing I've ever done." That night, they made love for the first time in months, not on a fertility schedule, not with the pressure of conception, just because they wanted to connect with each other. Madison fell asleep feeling more hopeful than she had in years. But 3 weeks later, everything changed. Madison was at the office supply store buying folders for a charity board meeting when she overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. "I can't believe Connor Reynolds is getting divorced. They seemed so perfect together." Madison's blood went cold. She moved closer, straining to hear more. "My friend works at Morrison, Blake and Associates. She said his lawyer's been preparing divorce papers for months. Apparently, he's claiming his wife is mentally unstable from all the fertility drugs." "That's terrible." But honestly, she did seem a little off at that gala last month. Remember those pictures where she looked really thin and tired? Madison felt the world spinning around her. Morrison, Blake and Associates was the law firm that had represented Reynolds Tech during their initial public offering. Connor knew the partners personally. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing through the past few months, the therapy sessions, Connor's sudden emotional availability, his questions about whether they were enough for each other without children. He'd been gathering evidence. That evening, Connor arrived home late as usual, claiming he'd been in meetings with potential investors. Madison waited until he was settled in his office before approaching. "How were your meetings today?" "Productive. We might have a lead on some additional funding for the European expansion." Madison studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. "Connor, are you happy in our marriage?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" "I heard something today. Something about divorce papers." For just a moment, Connor's composed mask slipped. Madison saw panic flash across his features before his public relations training kicked in. "Divorce papers? Madison, honey, you're not making sense. Are you feeling okay?" The concern in his voice was perfect, practiced. And suddenly Madison understood that their entire therapy experience had been performance art. "I'm making perfect sense. Someone saw paperwork at Morrison. Blake, your lawyers are preparing for divorce?" Connor set down his pen and looked at her with the expression she'd seen him use with difficult reporters, patient, slightly condescending, concerned for their mental state. "Sweetheart, I think the stress might be affecting your judgment. You're talking about conspiracy theories that don't exist. Maybe we should call Dr. Hernandez about adjusting your medication." The way he said it so reasonable, so caring, made Madison doubt herself for a moment. Was she being paranoid? Had the fertility treatments affected her thinking? But then she remembered the way Sarah Chen had touched his arm, the late nights he claimed to be working alone, his sudden interest in therapy that focused specifically on her emotional instability. "I want to see your phone." "Madison, if there's nothing to hide, show me your phone." Connor sighed deeply, the sound of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable woman. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This paranoia, these accusations, this isn't like you. The fact that you won't show me your phone tells me everything I need to know." "Fine." Connor pulled out his phone and handed it to her. "But when you don't find anything, I want you to seriously consider that you might need professional help." Madison scrolled through his recent calls and messages. Everything looked normal: business contacts, text exchanges about meetings and deals. Too normal, too clean. "You have another phone." "Madison, please listen to yourself. You're talking about secret phones and conspiracy theories. This is what happens when grief and medication and stress overwhelm someone's rational thinking." The worst part was how believable he sounded, how much he seemed to genuinely care about her well-being. If Madison hadn't overheard that conversation at the store, she might have started to believe she really was losing her mind. "I'm going to stay at Amy's tonight. Honey, please don't run away. Let's call Dr. Ross or Dr. Hernandez, someone who can help us work through this." Madison looked at her husband of 15 years, the man she'd loved, supported, believed in, sacrificed for, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Someone who could lie to her face with perfect sincerity, someone who could manipulate her grief and medical struggles to build a case against her, someone who had been planning to leave her while pretending to save their marriage. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, grabbing her keys. "Madison, please don't drive when you're this upset. Let me call you a car." Even now, even caught in his deception, he was performing the role of caring husband, and Madison understood with perfect clarity that she was in more danger than she'd ever imagined. Amy's apartment in Brooklyn felt like stepping into a different world, warm, cluttered with books and art supplies, smelling like the lavender candles their mother used to burn. Madison's sister took one look at her face and pulled her into a fierce hug. "What happened?" Over tea and leftover pizza, Madison told Amy everything: the overheard conversation, Connor's denial, the months of therapy that now felt like elaborate manipulation. "I keep wondering if I'm losing my mind," Madison admitted. He sounded so reasonable, so concerned. "What if the fertility treatments really have affected my judgment?" Amy was quiet for a long moment, studying her sister's face. "Maddie, Do you remember when we were kids and you thought someone was sneaking into your room at night? Madison frowned. That was different. I was 7. Mom and Dad kept telling you it was just dreams, that you were being dramatic. Remember, they made you feel crazy for months. Amy, it was Cousin Derek. During family visits, you were right the whole time, but everyone convinced you that you weren't. The memory hit Madison like a physical blow. She'd been so young, but she'd known something was wrong. The way Derek looked at her, the way he found excuses to be alone with her. But every adult had dismissed her fears as childhood imagination until her teenage babysitter finally caught him. Connor's making you doubt your own perceptions, Amy continued. That's what manipulative people do. They make you think you're the problem. Madison spent the night in Amy's guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to separate truth from manufactured doubt. By morning, she'd made a decision. I need evidence, she told Amy over breakfast. Real proof, not just overheard conversations and intuition. What kind of evidence? Financial records, phone records, something concrete that can't be explained away? Amy hesitated. Maddie, if he's really planning to divorce you and claim you're mentally unstable, gathering evidence might be dangerous. What if he finds out? But Madison was done being afraid. Then at least I'll know where I stand. She returned home that afternoon to find Connor in crisis management mode. He greeted her with flowers and her favorite takeout from the Thai restaurant, where they'd celebrated their first big investor meeting. I've been thinking about what you said last night, he began carefully. And I realize I haven't been fully honest about how stressed I've been about work. Maybe that's why you're picking up on something feeling off. Madison accepted the flowers and let him guide her to the couch. What do you mean? The European expansion is more complicated than I've let on. We're hemorrhaging money on regulatory compliance. And if we don't close the Patterson deal, we might have to lay off 30% of our workforce. Connor's voice was heavy with worry, and for a moment Madison felt guilty for suspecting him. But then she noticed he was watching her reaction carefully, gauging whether his story was working. Why haven't you told me this before? I didn't want to add to your stress while you're dealing with the fertility treatments. But keeping secrets isn't fair to either of us. It was a masterful performance, just enough vulnerability to explain suspicious behavior. Just enough truth to be believable. Madison found herself nodding along, feeling her certainty from the morning begin to waver. I've scheduled us an appointment with Dr. Ross for tomorrow, Connor continued. I think we need professional help navigating both the work stress and the fertility struggles. That's a good idea. Connor smiled and kissed her forehead. I love you, Maddie. We're going to get through this stronger than ever. But as he headed to his office to catch up on emails, Madison noticed he took his phone with him and closed the door. In 15 years of marriage, Connor had never closed his office door when he was just working. That night, while Connor slept beside her, Madison lay awake forming a plan. She needed someone she could trust, someone with expertise in investigating financial fraud, someone who understood the tech industry and could help her navigate whatever Connor was hiding. The next morning, she called her college roommate Jessica, who now worked as a forensic accountant for a white-collar crime unit in Chicago. Jess, I need advice about investigating someone's financial records. Hypothetically, Jessica's laugh was warm but knowing. Honey, in my line of work, nothing's ever hypothetical. What's going on? Madison explained the situation carefully, leaving out names and specific details. Jessica listened without interrupting. Your hypothetical situation sounds like textbook financial abuse preparation, Jessica said finally. The gaslighting, the secretiveness, the sudden interest in documenting mental health issues, I see this pattern in about 60% of high-asset divorce cases. So what should my hypothetical friend do? Document everything, and I mean everything. Financial statements, business records, communication patterns, witness observations. Most importantly, she needs to do it without the husband knowing. If he's as sophisticated as you're describing, he's probably already preparing his narrative. What kind of narrative? Unstable wife tries to destroy successful husband's business empire. It's a classic. Make her look greedy, crazy, and vindictive while he looks like the reasonable victim. Madison felt sick. How does someone fight back against that? Very carefully, and with better evidence than he has. That afternoon, During their therapy session, Madison watched Connor perform concern and devotion for Dr. Ross. He spoke about his fears for Madison's mental health, his guilt about working too much, his commitment to supporting her through their fertility struggles. Madison seems to be experiencing some paranoid thoughts, Connor explained. She's convinced I'm hiding things from her, planning to leave her. The stress of the treatments combined with some family history of mental illness has me worried. Madison's blood went cold. She had no family history of mental illness. Connor was building his case with fabricated details. Madison, how are you feeling about Connor's observations? Dr. Ross asked. Madison looked between the two men, her husband who was systematically destroying her credibility, and the therapist who seemed to be buying every word. I think Connor's right that I've been stressed, she said carefully. But I also think there are things happening that I don't fully understand yet. Connor reached over and took her hand. That's exactly what I mean. Madison's always been so perceptive, so rational. This feeling that there are mysterious things happening, it's just not like her. Dr. Ross nodded thoughtfully. Fertility treatments can definitely affect cognitive function and emotional regulation. Madison, have you discussed these concerns with Dr. Hernandez? Madison realized she was trapped. Anything she said about her suspicions would be used as evidence of her instability, but staying silent meant accepting Connor's narrative. I think I need some time to process everything we've discussed today, she said finally. As they walked to their car after the session, Connor was solicitous and caring. How are you feeling about Dr. Ross's suggestions? Which suggestions? About maybe taking a break from the fertility treatments until we get your emotional balance stabilized, and possibly consulting with a psychiatrist about medication for anxiety? Madison stopped walking. He didn't suggest either of those things. Connor's expression was patient, concerned. Sweetheart, we just spent an hour discussing exactly those suggestions. This is what I'm worried about. You're not processing information clearly. For a moment, Madison wondered if she was losing her mind. Had Dr. Ross really suggested psychiatric medication? Had she missed entire parts of the conversation? But then she remembered what Amy had said about Derek, about the years of being told her perceptions were wrong. She remembered Jessica's warning about narrative building. I want copies of all our business financial records, she said suddenly. Connor's step faltered almost imperceptibly. Why? If we're having money problems serious enough to require layoffs, I want to understand our situation. I helped build this company. I have a right to know. Of course you do. I'll have Sarah prepare a summary for you. Not a summary, complete records, bank statements, investment portfolios, offshore accounts, everything. Connor stopped walking entirely. Madison, you're talking about thousands of documents. Most of it is highly technical financial information that wouldn't mean anything without context. Then provide context. They stood on the sidewalk outside the therapy building, and Madison saw something shift in Connor's expression. The mask of concern slipped for just a moment, replaced by something cold and calculating. I'll see what I can do, he said finally. But Madison knew she would never see those records. Just like she knew that Connor was already 3 steps ahead of her, building a case that would destroy her credibility before she could expose whatever he was hiding. The war for her life had begun, and she was already losing. Madison woke up in a psychiatric facility with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was arguing with Connor about the financial records. Now she was wearing a hospital gown, strapped to a bed, with a doctor she'd never seen before explaining that she'd had a complete psychotic break. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Warner. You've been here for 3 days. Do you remember anything about your admission? Madison's mouth felt like cotton, her thoughts sluggish and unclear. 3 days, where's Connor? Your husband has been here every day. He's very concerned about you. According to the admission notes, you became violent when he tried to discuss your therapy session. You threatened to destroy the company and hurt yourself. The words felt foreign, impossible. Madison had never been violent in her life. That's not. I wouldn't. Memory issues are common after episodes like this. Your husband provided extensive documentation of your deteriorating mental state over the past few months. Paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, threats of self-harm. Dr. Warner showed Madison a thick file. Through her drug-induced haze, Madison could see session notes from Dr. Ross, emails supposedly from her to Connor, with increasingly unhinged content, even voice recordings of her making threats she had no memory of making. "I want to see Connor," Madison managed. "He'll be here this afternoon. But Mrs. Reynolds, we need to discuss your treatment plan. Based on your husband's documentation and our observations, we recommend a minimum 30-day inpatient program." 30 days. Madison understood with perfect clarity that Connor had won. While she was locked away being treated, he would have complete control of their assets, their company, their narrative. By the time she got out, she would be the crazy wife who'd tried to destroy America's tech darling. "I want to call my sister. Family visits need to be approved by your primary support person. Your husband felt it would be better to limit outside contact until you're more stable." Madison closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Connor's trap settling around her. He'd used her own words from therapy against her, manufactured evidence of mental illness, and now had her isolated from anyone who might question his story. But as the days passed and the medication fog began to clear, Madison's mind sharpened with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She began to remember things, small details that hadn't seemed important before. Connor insisting she take vitamins every morning for her health, the way he'd encouraged her to share her deepest fears and anxieties during therapy, his pattern of asking leading questions about her family history, particularly about her grandmother's brief depression after childbirth, the fertility treatments. Madison's doctor visits had been scheduled by Connor's assistant, Sarah. The medications had been delivered directly to their apartment rather than picked up at a pharmacy. With growing horror, Madison realized the scope of Connor's deception. The fertility drugs that were supposed to help her get pregnant. What if they'd been designed to do something else entirely? What if her years of unsuccessful treatments had been sabotaged from the beginning on her 10th day in the facility? Madison pretended to swallow her evening medications but palmed them instead. Over the next 48 hours, as her thinking cleared completely, she formulated a plan. She needed allies, people who could help her gather evidence while she was trapped inside. But everyone she trusted was either controlled by Connor or convinced of her mental illness. Except Amy. Madison's opportunity came during art therapy. While the counselor was helping another patient, Madison approached Janet, a nurse who'd been kind to her. "My sister doesn't know I'm here," Madison said quietly. "My husband said he'd call her, but I don't think he did. Could you help me contact her, just so she knows I'm okay?" Janet hesitated. "I'm not supposed to. Please, she's probably worried sick. One phone call." That evening, Janet slipped Madison a cell phone for 5 minutes. Amy answered on the first ring. "Thank God, Maddie, where are you? Connor said you were taking some time away to think, but that was 2 weeks ago." "Amy, listen carefully. I'm in a psychiatric hospital. Connor had me committed. I need you to help me, but you can't let him know we've talked." "What, Maddie? That's impossible. Connor would never. He's been planning to divorce me for months. Everything I suspected was true. He's using my fertility treatments and therapy sessions to claim I'm mentally ill. I have maybe 3 minutes before I have to give this phone back." Madison quickly explained what she needed: copies of business records, information about offshore accounts, anything that could prove Connor was hiding assets. "How am I supposed to get access to that? Remember Mom's friend Patricia, who works in corporate banking? Start there, and Amy Connor's going to try to turn you against me. He'll show you evidence that I'm unstable, maybe even dangerous. Don't believe him." "Maddie, this sounds crazy, I know, but I need you to trust me the way I should have trusted myself about Derek." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Amy's voice came back, steady and determined. "Tell me what you need." Over the following weeks, as Madison played the role of recovering patient, Amy worked quietly to uncover Connor's secrets. She started with small things: public business records, news articles, social media posts that Connor's team hadn't thought to scrub. What she found was revealing. Reynolds Tech's financial statements showed consistent profitability, but the investment accounts linked to the company told a different story. Money was flowing out faster than it was coming in, but not to business expenses. Amy traced the outflows to a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Most led nowhere, but one pattern emerged that made Amy's blood run cold. Regular payments to Dr. Michael Ross, the marriage counselor. Payments that started 3 months before Connor and Madison's first session. But the most damaging discovery came from an unexpected source. Amy's college friend Marcus worked in digital forensics for the FBI. When Amy casually mentioned that she was worried about her sister's marriage to a tech CEO, Marcus offered to run a quick background check. "Holy shit," Marcus said after reviewing Connor's digital footprint. "Your sister's husband has been methodically destroying her fertility for 3 years." Marcus showed Amy records that Connor had been careless about payments to a private laboratory for custom hormone preparations, communications with a doctor who specialized in fertility sabotage for insurance fraud cases, even research into drugs that would mimic psychiatric symptoms. "This isn't just financial abuse," Marcus explained. "This is assault. He's been systematically poisoning her while pretending to support her desire to have children." Amy felt sick. "Can you prove it in court? With the right warrant, absolutely. But we'd need the victim to file a complaint, and she'd need to be able to demonstrate competency to testify. She's locked in a psychiatric hospital because of his manipulations. Then we need to get her out, and we need to do it in a way that doesn't alert him to what we've discovered." Amy stared at the evidence spread across Marcus's desk bank records, communication logs, medical receipts, and realized her sister hadn't been paranoid or mentally ill. She'd been the victim of a sophisticated, long-term conspiracy designed to destroy every aspect of her life. Connor Reynolds hadn't just been planning to divorce Madison. He'd been planning to erase her entirely, leaving himself free to start over with his assets intact and his reputation unblemished. But Connor had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the power of sisters who refused to abandon each other. The real war was just beginning. Detective Maria Santos had seen enough white-collar crime to recognize patterns, and the information Amy Reynolds brought her fit a pattern that made her stomach turn. She'd been investigating Reynolds Tech for potential SEC violations for 6 months, but this was the first evidence that suggested the crimes were personal as well as financial. "Your sister is still committed?" Detective Santos asked, reviewing the documents Amy had spread across her desk. "For another 2 weeks. The doctors say she's responding well to treatment, but I think that just means she's learned to play along with their narrative." Detective Santos studied the financial records Marcus had helped Amy compile. "This level of asset manipulation requires sophisticated planning. Your brother-in-law didn't do this alone." "What do you mean?" "Look at these offshore transfers. The timing, the amounts, the receiving accounts. This is the work of someone who understands international banking regulations and tax avoidance strategies. Connor Reynolds might be smart, but he's not this kind of smart." Amy leaned forward. "So who's helping him? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to get your sister out of that hospital with her credibility intact. If Connor's lawyers can claim she's mentally incompetent, her testimony becomes worthless." Detective Santos had a plan, but it required perfect timing and absolute secrecy. First, they needed additional evidence from inside Reynolds Tech, proof that Connor had been systematically looting the company while preparing for divorce. "I might know someone who can help with that," Amy said slowly. "Madison mentioned that Connor fired his CTO about 6 months ago. Alex something. She said Connor claimed it was about performance issues, but Alex had been with the company since the beginning." "Alex Thompson," Detective Santos confirmed, checking her notes. "I interviewed him as part of the SEC investigation. He was terminated after questioning some unusual financial transfers. Severance agreement includes a strict non-disclosure clause. Would he talk to us if he knew it might help Madison? Maybe. But we'd need to be very careful. If Connor finds out we're building a case, he could have Madison transferred to a long-term facility or claim she's a danger to herself." The next morning, Amy met Alex Thompson at a coffee shop in Queens, far from Manhattan's tech corridor where Connor's connections ran deep. Alex was younger than she'd expected, probably early 30s, with the tired look of someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret. "I've been wondering when someone would ask about the real reason I was fired," Alex said after Amy explained why she'd contacted him. "What really happened?" Alex pulled out a tablet and showed Amy a series of financial reports. "About 8 months ago, I noticed irregularities in our international accounts. Money going out faster than our revenue could support. When I asked Connor about it, he said it was related to the European expansion. But you didn't believe him. The amounts were too large, and the receiving accounts didn't match any vendors or partners I recognized. So I did some digging. Alex's investigation had revealed that Connor was using Reynolds Tech's international subsidiaries to hide personal assets. Profits that should have gone to shareholders or back into the company were being diverted to accounts that Connor controlled personally. It gets worse, Alex continued. I found evidence that Connor has been inflating the company's value artificially. Fake contracts, phantom revenue, even employees who don't exist but are receiving salaries that go straight to Connor's accounts. Amy stared at the evidence, trying to process the scope of Connor's fraud. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate about $200 million over 3 years. And you took this to Connor. I thought maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. I respected him. Madison had hired me personally, and I believed in what they were building together. Alex's voice grew quiet. Connor offered me $10 million to keep quiet. When I refused, he had me fired and threatened to sue me for corporate espionage if I ever talked about what I discovered. But you kept copies of the evidence. Alex nodded. I knew someone would eventually ask the right questions. Amy felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just about divorce or even financial abuse anymore. Connor had committed serious federal crimes, and they had documentation to prove it, but their victory was short-lived. That afternoon, Amy received a call from Connor. Amy, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to update you on Madison's progress. Connor's voice was warm, concerned. Everything Madison had said it would be. Amy forced herself to sound normal. How is she? Better, thank God. The doctors think she might be ready for supervised visits soon. I know she's missed you. I've missed her too. Actually, I was hoping we could meet for coffee. I think there are some things you should know about Madison's condition before you see her. Some of her delusions have been quite specific, and her doctors want to make sure family members understand what to expect. Amy's blood ran cold. Connor was preparing to turn her against Madison, just as Madison had predicted. What kind of delusions? Conspiracy theories. Mostly. She's convinced that I've been stealing money from the company, that I had her committed as part of some elaborate plan to divorce her. The doctors say it's common for people in her condition to create complex narratives that make them the victim of circumstances beyond their control. Connor's explanation was perfectly reasonable, delivered with just the right amount of sadness and concern. If Amy didn't know what she knew, she might have believed him. That must be so difficult for you. It is. But I love her, and I'm committed to getting her the help she needs. The important thing is that we don't feed into her delusions by treating them as reality. After hanging up, Amy immediately called Detective Santos. He knows, Amy said. I don't know how, but Connor knows someone's been asking questions. Are you sure? He wants to meet with me to prepare me for Madison's delusions. He's going to show me evidence that she's crazy and try to convince me to help maintain his narrative. Detective Santos was quiet for a moment. This might actually work in our favor. Let him show you his evidence. Document everything he says. Meanwhile, we'll accelerate our timeline for getting Madison out. How? Dr. Jennifer Park. Amy had never heard the name before, but Detective Santos explained that Dr. Park was the physician who had been providing Madison's fertility medications. Marcus's digital forensics had revealed that Dr. Park had been receiving payments from Connor beyond what insurance covered. She's agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Tomorrow, she's going to admit Madison to her private clinic for specialized fertility-related psychiatric care. It's a legal transfer that will get Madison out of Connor's controlled environment. And then what? Then we give Madison 24 hours to recover from whatever they've been drugging her with, and we show her everything we found. If she's willing to testify, we can have Connor arrested by the end of the week. Amy hung up feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time since this nightmare began. Connor might be sophisticated, but he'd made one crucial error. He'd been so focused on controlling Madison that he'd forgotten about everyone who loved her. Tomorrow, Madison would be free, and then Connor Reynolds would learn that some cages could be escaped, and some women fought back. Madison woke up in Dr. Park's private clinic feeling clearer than she had in months. Whatever cocktail of drugs they'd been giving her at the psychiatric facility was finally working its way out of her system, and for the first time in weeks, her thoughts felt sharp and focused. How are you feeling? Dr. Park asked during Madison's first consultation. Like myself again. Madison answered honestly. Why did you help me get transferred here? Dr. Park was quiet for a long moment, studying Madison's medical chart. Because I've been participating in something terrible, and I need to make it right. Over the next hour, Dr. Park explained the full scope of Connor's deception. The fertility medications Madison had been taking for 3 years weren't designed to help her get pregnant. They were carefully calibrated to prevent pregnancy while mimicking the side effects of legitimate fertility treatments. But why would Connor want to prevent pregnancy? He said he wanted children as much as I did. The medications you were taking can also cause mood swings, cognitive disruption, and in some cases, symptoms that mimic psychiatric disorders. Your husband wasn't just preventing pregnancy, he was systematically undermining your mental stability. Madison felt sick. For how long, based on the prescription records? At least 3 years, possibly longer. 3 years of failed treatments, 3 years of believing her body was failing her, 3 years of hormonal manipulation designed to make her doubt her own sanity. Why did you go along with this, Doctor? Park's voice was barely above a whisper. He paid me $500,000 over 3 years, and he had evidence of some irregularities in my practice, tax issues. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd destroy my career. Madison stared at the woman who had been systematically poisoning her, feeling a complex mix of rage and pity. So you helped him destroy mine instead. I'm trying to make it right now. I've given all the medical records to Detective Santos, the prescription logs, the payment records, everything. That afternoon, Amy arrived with Detective Santos and Alex Thompson. Madison listened in growing amazement as they laid out the evidence they'd gathered: the financial fraud, the asset manipulation, the elaborate conspiracy to control every aspect of her life. We have enough to arrest Connor on multiple federal charges, Detective Santos explained. Financial fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and assault through medical sabotage. But we need your testimony to make the strongest possible case. Madison looked at the documents spread across the conference table: bank records, email communications, medical files, and felt a complex mix of vindication and grief. She'd been right about everything, but the cost of being right was staggering. What happens when Connor finds out I'm no longer committed? That's the beauty of our timing, Detective Santos said. Connor thinks you're still locked away being treated. He has no idea we've been investigating him. He's gotten comfortable, sloppy. Yesterday, he transferred another $10 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. You've been monitoring his accounts. Among other things, Connor Reynolds has been very busy while you've been away. He's liquidated most of your joint investments, transferred ownership of your apartment to shell companies he controls, and filed preliminary divorce papers claiming you're mentally incompetent. Madison absorbed this information with surprising calm. After months of feeling like she was losing her mind, the clarity of Connor's betrayal was almost a relief. There's something else, Amy said gently. Sarah Chen, Connor's assistant, she's pregnant. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Connor hadn't just been planning to divorce Madison, he'd been planning to replace her entirely. The assistant who'd been helping him hide assets and build his case against Madison was also carrying his child. How far along is she? About 4 months, which means Connor got her pregnant while you were going through your last round of IVF treatments. Madison closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of manipulation and abuse settling around her. Connor hadn't just stolen her money and destroyed her reputation. He'd stolen her dreams of motherhood while creating a new family with another woman. I want him to pay for everything, Madison said quietly. Not just the money. Everything. Detective Santos leaned forward. Are you willing to wear a wire? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Madison would return home as if she'd been discharged from Dr. Park's clinic with a clean bill of mental health. She'd pretend to be grateful for Connor's support during her breakdown and ask for his help rebuilding their marriage. Connor, believing he'd won, would likely become overconfident. Men like him couldn't resist explaining their cleverness, especially to victims they thought they'd defeated. He'll want to confess, Detective Santos explained. Narcissists always do. They need their victims to understand how completely they've been outmaneuvered. Madison spent the evening practicing her role: the grateful wife, the woman who'd learned her lesson, the reformed patient ready to accept Connor's version of reality. It was perhaps the most important performance of her life. The next morning, Madison walked into their penthouse apartment carrying flowers and wearing the recording device that would capture Connor's confession. He was having breakfast on the terrace, reading financial reports on his tablet. Madison. His surprise seemed genuine. I thought you weren't being discharged until next week. Dr. Park said I was responding so well to treatment that she felt comfortable releasing me early. Connor, I owe you an enormous apology. Connor set down his tablet, his expression cautiously hopeful. Sweetheart, you don't need to apologize for being sick. Madison moved closer, forcing herself to take his hands. I do need to apologize. The paranoia, the accusations. I was so lost in my own grief about the fertility treatments that I created conspiracy theories to avoid dealing with reality. The doctors explained that to me. It's not your fault. I know you've been under enormous stress with work, and instead of supporting you, I made everything worse. Can you forgive me? Connor's smile was radiant, triumphant. Of course I forgive you. I love you. Madison, I've always loved you. Madison felt sick touching him, but she forced herself to lean closer. Dr. Park helped me understand how the fertility drugs affected my thinking. I'm ready to accept that maybe we're not meant to have children. Maybe we're enough for each other, just as we are. Actually, Connor said, his voice taking on a different quality, there's something I need to tell you about that. Madison held her breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether they had enough evidence to destroy Connor completely. I haven't been entirely honest about the fertility treatments, Connor continued. The truth is, I realized about 3 years ago that having children might not be the best choice for us. What do you mean? Connor's voice grew more confident, more excited. This was the moment he'd been waiting for the chance to reveal his masterpiece. I mean, I've been protecting us from making a mistake that could have ruined everything we built together. Madison forced herself to look confused rather than horrified. Connor, I don't understand. The fertility medications Dr. Park prescribed weren't designed to help you get pregnant. Sweetheart, they were designed to prevent it while making you think the problem was medical. Connor's confession poured out of him like a dam breaking 3 years of careful planning, manipulation, and control. He explained how he'd researched the psychological effects of certain hormone combinations, how he'd paid Dr. Park to prescribe medications that would make Madison emotionally unstable while preventing the pregnancy she desperately wanted. But why? Madison whispered, though she already knew the answer. Because I needed you to seem mentally fragile for the divorce. Because I needed clean access to our assets without having to split them with someone who wasn't contributing to their creation anymore. Because Sarah is carrying my son, and I need to be free to build a life with them. Connor was beaming now, proud of his own cleverness. The best part is, everyone will understand why I had to leave you. The fertility struggles, the mental breakdown, the paranoid accusations. I'm the sympathetic husband who tried everything to save his troubled wife. Madison stared at her husband of 15 years, the man she'd loved and supported and believed in, and realized she was looking at a sociopath. Someone who could systematically destroy another person's life and feel proud of his ingenuity. You're incredible, she said, and meant it. Connor pulled her into his arms, and Madison forced herself not to recoil from his touch. In a few hours, this nightmare would be over. Connor Reynolds would be in handcuffs, and she would finally be free. But first, she had one more question. Connor, how did you hide all the money? The offshore accounts, the shell companies. I never would have figured out something that sophisticated. Connor's eyes lit up. He was enjoying this so much, the chance to reveal the full scope of his brilliance. That's the beautiful part. Madison, I didn't do it alone. Connor's confession continued for another hour, each revelation more damning than the last. Madison learned that his conspiracy involved not just Dr. Park and Sarah Chen, but also Dr. Ross, the marriage counselor, several Reynolds Tech board members, and Connor's lawyer at Morrison, Blake and Associates. Dr. Ross was documenting your deteriorating mental state from our very first session, Connor explained with obvious pride. Every emotional breakthrough, every vulnerable moment, it was all being recorded and analyzed to build the strongest possible case for your incompetency. Madison forced herself to nod appreciatively. That's brilliant. I never suspected him. The fertility treatments were just one prong of the strategy. The therapy sessions provided documentation of your psychological instability. The business stress gave me cover for working late and being secretive. And the pregnancy with Sarah created a timeline that makes my decision to leave seem urgent and justified. Connor was pacing now, energized by the opportunity to explain his masterpiece. The financial restructuring was the most complex part. I couldn't just steal money outright that would have triggered audits. Instead, I created a network of legitimate-seeming international transactions that gradually moved our personal assets into accounts I could control. How much money are we talking about? About 400 million, all told, half from our personal investments, half skimmed from Reynolds Tech over the past 4 years. Madison's blood went cold. Connor hadn't just stolen from her, he'd been stealing from their employees, their investors, everyone who trusted them to build something meaningful. What about the company itself? What happens to Reynolds Tech? Connor shrugged. It'll probably go bankrupt within 2 years. The debt-to-asset ratio is unsustainable without the money I've moved offshore. But by then, I'll be living in a non-extradition country with enough money to last several lifetimes. Non-extradition country, Switzerland, initially, then probably somewhere in Southeast Asia. Sarah's already secured citizenship for both her and the baby through her family's connections. Madison realized with growing horror that Connor had been planning not just to destroy her, but to disappear entirely. He would vanish with his new family and stolen fortune, leaving her broke, discredited, and facing legal liability for crimes he'd committed in her name. Connor, this is incredible. But how did you know I wouldn't figure it out? Connor's smile was cold, triumphant. Because I know you, Madison. You're too trusting, too willing to blame yourself instead of seeing the truth. Even when you started getting suspicious, you assumed the problem was with you, not with me. You used my own self-doubt against me. Exactly. The fertility struggles made you vulnerable, desperate for someone to tell you what was wrong and how to fix it. The therapy sessions gave me a framework for manipulating your emotional responses. And the medical sabotage ensured that you'd always be slightly off balance, never quite thinking clearly enough to see the whole picture. Connor sat down beside Madison, taking her hands in his. The beautiful thing is, it worked perfectly. You're sitting here right now, grateful for my support, ready to rebuild our marriage. Even knowing what I've told you, you still want to believe we can work things out. Madison looked into Connor's eyes and saw someone she'd never met before, someone who could destroy another person's life as a strategic exercise, someone who felt entitled to take whatever he wanted from whoever was convenient. What happens now? She asked. Now we have a quiet divorce. You'll get enough money to live comfortably, maybe 10 or 15 million, and I'll get a clean start with Sarah and the baby. The media narrative will be that we grew apart during the fertility struggles, that we both handled the stress badly, but that we're separating amicably. And if I don't agree to that narrative, Connor's expression hardened slightly, then the full story of your mental breakdown becomes public. The suicide attempt, the paranoid delusions, the medical records documenting your psychological instability. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting to be taken seriously about anything. Madison nodded slowly, as if considering his offer. You've thought of everything. I have. The only question is whether you're smart enough to take the deal I'm offering. Madison stood up, walking to the window that overlooked Central Park. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the life Connor was describing. Quiet, comfortable, defeated. She could take his money and disappear, start over somewhere new, spend the rest of her life trying to forget that she'd once been married to a monster. But then she thought about Amy, who'd risked everything to help her, about Alex Thompson, who'd been fired for trying to do the right thing, about Dr. Park, who'd been blackmailed into participating in Connor's conspiracy, about all the Reynolds Tech employees who would lose their jobs when the company collapsed, about the woman she'd been before Connor started systematically destroying her. Connor, she said, turning back to face him, there's something I need to tell you. His expression was indulgent, patient. What's that, sweetheart? Madison reached into her purse and pulled out the recording device Detective Santos had given her. I've been recording this entire conversation. For the first time since she'd known him, Connor looked genuinely surprised. You've been what? Recording? Everything you just told me about the financial fraud, the medical sabotage, The offshore accounts, the planned disappearance, all of it is documented. Connor stared at the device in her hand, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. That's impossible. You've been in a psychiatric facility. You're mentally incompetent. No one would believe. Actually, I've been working with Detective Maria Santos of the SEC Enforcement Division for the past 2 weeks, along with your former CTO, Alex Thompson, your co-conspirator, Dr. Jennifer Park, and several federal agents who've been monitoring your international transactions. Madison felt a surge of power unlike anything she'd ever experienced. For 3 years, Connor had held all the cards, controlled every aspect of their relationship, manipulated her reality with surgical precision. But now, finally, she was the one with the advantage. Dr. Inna Park has already provided testimony about the medical fraud. Alex has documentation of the financial crimes. Detective Santos has bank records showing every illegal transaction you've made. And now I have your complete confession, in your own words, admitting to everything. Connor was on his feet now, his composure finally cracking. You can't prove any of this. I'll claim you manipulated the recordings, that you coerced me somehow. Actually, Connor, I can prove all of it, because while you were explaining your brilliant plan, federal agents were executing search warrants at Reynolds Tech, Morrison, Blake and Associates, and Dr. Ross's office. They're seizing computers, financial records, communication logs, everything. The color drained from Connor's face. This is impossible. You're not smart enough to outsmart you. You're right. I wasn't. But I didn't do this alone. See? While you were using my love for you against me, I had people who loved me working to save me. People who believed in my worth, even when I'd forgotten it myself. Madison walked to the door, then turned back to look at Connor one final time. The federal agents should be here any minute to arrest you. Sarah Chen is also being arrested at her apartment, apparently. She's been cooperative about providing evidence against you in exchange for immunity. Connor's mask of control finally shattered completely. Madison, please. We can work this out. I can make this right. The money, the company, we can fix everything together. Madison looked at the man who had been systematically destroying her life for 3 years, who had stolen her dreams of motherhood while creating a new family with another woman, who had been planning to disappear and leave her holding responsibility for his crimes. No, Connor, we can't fix anything together, but I can fix things without you. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of Detective Santos and her team. Madison opened the door to let them in, then stepped aside as they read Connor his rights. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Connor looked at Madison with an expression of pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done. You'll never recover from this. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Madison smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. Connor, everyone's about to know exactly what kind of person you really are. That's the beautiful thing about the truth. It doesn't care what story you were planning to tell. As they led Connor away, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that she was going to be okay. 6 months later, Madison sat in a federal courtroom listening to Connor's sentencing. The judge's words carried the weight of complete vindication: 25 years for financial fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and assault through medical sabotage. With federal sentencing guidelines, Connor would serve at least 20 years before being eligible for parole. Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, looking directly at Connor, this court has rarely seen such a systematic and callous abuse of trust. You didn't just steal money, you attempted to destroy another human being's sanity, health, and future for your own financial gain. Madison felt Amy squeeze her hand as Connor was led away in shackles. He didn't look back. The financial recovery had been more successful than anyone had expected. Federal agents had frozen Connor's offshore accounts before he could access them, and the complex web of shell companies he'd created actually made it easier to trace where the money had gone. Madison would recover approximately $800 million more than their original net worth, since Connor's financial manipulations had included profitable investments he'd hidden from her. Reynolds Tech had survived, barely. With Connor gone and the stolen assets returned, the company was financially stable but needed new leadership. The board had unanimously voted to offer Madison the CEO position, recognizing that she'd been the strategic mind behind much of their early success I'm not sure I'm ready to go back there. Madison had told Amy during one of their many conversations about the future. So many of those people believed Connor's lies about me. They watched me get escorted out of that charity gala in handcuffs and didn't question his narrative. But Alex Thompson didn't believe it, Amy reminded her. And neither did Marcus from IT or Jennifer from marketing, or at least a dozen other employees who've reached out to apologize and ask you to come back. Madison had ultimately decided to take the CEO position, but only temporarily. Her real passion was the nonprofit she'd started with part of the recovered money, an organization dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse and rebuild their lives. She'd learned more about the tactics of economic control than she'd ever wanted to know, and she was determined to use that knowledge to help others. The medical recovery had been more complex. Dr. Park had provided detailed information about the hormone manipulations Connor had orchestrated, allowing Madison's new fertility specialist to design a treatment plan that addressed 3 years of systematic sabotage. But the emotional recovery was just as important as the physical healing. "You're 36, Dr. Sarah Kim had told Madison during her first appointment. Fertility naturally declines with age, but there's no medical reason why you couldn't have a successful pregnancy. The question is whether that's still what you want." Madison had thought about that question for weeks. Did she still want children? Or had that desire been so twisted by Connor's manipulations that it no longer felt authentic? Was she trying to have a baby because she genuinely wanted to be a mother? Or because Connor had spent 3 years convincing her she couldn't? The answer came during a conversation with one of the women at her nonprofit, a teacher from Detroit, whose husband had been systematically stealing her salary and destroying her credit for 8 years. "You know what I missed most?" the woman had said. "Not the money, not even the security. I missed believing in my own dreams. He'd convinced me that wanting anything for myself was selfish, unrealistic, crazy." Madison understood. Connor hadn't just stolen her money and manipulated her body. He'd stolen her ability to trust her own desires. Reclaiming that trust was perhaps the most important part of her recovery. She'd started fertility treatments again 6 months after Connor's arrest, this time with a doctor she'd chosen herself, medications she'd researched personally, and a support system that included Amy, Detective Santos, and a growing network of friends who knew exactly who she was and what she'd survived. The first positive pregnancy test came on a Tuesday morning in October. Madison stared at the 2 pink lines for a full 5 minutes before calling Amy. "Are you sure?" Amy asked, her voice breathless with excitement. "I've taken 4 tests. I'm sure." Madison was crying, but they were tears of joy mixed with something deeper, the satisfaction of reclaiming something Connor had tried to take from her forever. The pregnancy progressed normally, monitored carefully by doctors who understood her medical history. Madison found herself cautiously optimistic, then genuinely excited, then fiercely protective of the new life growing inside her. But perhaps the most healing moment came during her 20-week ultrasound, when the technician pointed to the screen and said, "Would you like to know the gender?" "Yes," Madison said without hesitation. "It's a girl." A daughter. Madison would have a daughter who would grow up knowing that women could build companies, recover from betrayal, fight for justice, and win. A daughter who would never doubt her own perceptions or apologize for trusting her instincts. "What will you name her?" Amy asked later. Madison had already decided. "Victoria. It means victory." As her pregnancy advanced, Madison gradually transitioned out of her temporary CEO role at Reynolds Tech, training her replacement and ensuring the company's long-term stability. She'd decided to focus full-time on her nonprofit and her family, building the life she'd always wanted on her own terms. Connor had tried to reach out twice from prison letters that his lawyer delivered, asking for visitation rights, claiming he wanted to make amends and discuss their daughter's future. Madison had thrown both letters away without reading them completely. "He has no parental rights," her lawyer had assured her. "His conviction for assault through medical sabotage legally terminates any claim he might have had to custody or visitation." Madison was grateful for the legal protection, but she didn't need it. Connor Reynolds had no power over her anymore. Not emotional, not financial, not psychological. She'd built a new life surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was, and she'd learned to trust her own strength. The woman who'd once doubted her own sanity had become someone other women turned to for guidance and support. The woman who'd been systematically isolated and controlled had built a community of allies and friends. The woman whose dreams had been stolen had created new dreams and made them reality. Connor had spent 3 years trying to erase Madison Reynolds. Instead, he'd helped her discover exactly how strong she really was. 18 years later. Madison sat in the gallery of a federal courthouse watching her daughter prosecute a case that felt eerily familiar. Victoria Reynolds Chen had grown up to become a federal prosecutor, specializing in white-collar crime. And today she was presenting evidence against a tech CEO accused of systematically defrauding his employees while emotionally abusing his wife. Madison watched her daughter command the courtroom with quiet authority, laying out a complex financial conspiracy with the same methodical precision Madison had learned during her own legal battle decades earlier. Victoria had inherited Connor's intelligence and Madison's sense of justice, a combination that made her formidable in court. The defendant didn't just steal money, Victoria told the jury. He stole his victims' ability to trust their own perceptions, their own worth, their own future. Financial abuse is never just about money. It's about power, control, and the systematic destruction of another person's autonomy. Madison felt tears prick her eyes, remembering a time when she'd barely been able to trust her own memories, let alone speak about them in public. Her daughter had never experienced that kind of systematic gaslighting, but she understood it intuitively, perhaps because she'd been raised by someone who'd survived it. After the court session, Madison and Victoria had lunch at a cafe near the courthouse. At 36, Victoria was approaching the age Madison had been when her world imploded, but her life looked completely different. Stable career, healthy marriage to her college sweetheart David, 2 young children, and unshakable confidence in her own judgment. "Mom," Victoria said over their salads, "I've been thinking about writing a book, about your case, but also about the pattern of financial abuse we see in so many white-collar crime cases." Madison considered this. Over the years, she'd shared her story at conferences and nonprofit events, always emphasizing that financial abuse could happen to anyone: smart women, successful women, women who thought they were too sophisticated to be manipulated. What would you want to say that hasn't been said already? I think people still don't understand how sophisticated these schemes can be. They see a story like yours and think, "I would have figured it out sooner," or "I would never let someone do that to me." But Connor wasn't some obvious villain. He was charming, successful, publicly devoted to you. The manipulation was so gradual, so carefully calibrated, that even someone as smart as you didn't see it until it was almost too late. Victoria was right. Even now, 18 years later, Madison occasionally met women who'd heard her story and responded with subtle judgment, the assumption that Madison must have been naive, desperate, or somehow complicit in her own victimization. "What I want people to understand," Victoria continued, "is that predators like Connor specifically target strong, successful women. They don't want victims who are obviously vulnerable. They want the challenge of breaking someone who seems unbreakable." Madison nodded. She'd learned this lesson through years of working with abuse survivors. The women who sought help at her nonprofit weren't weak or naive. They were doctors, lawyers, business owners, teachers. They were women who'd built successful lives and careers before encountering someone skilled at dismantling their confidence piece by piece. "There's something else," Victoria added. "I want to write about what happened to Connor. Not just the trial and conviction, but what came after." Madison had tried not to think about Connor's life in prison over the years. She'd received updates occasionally. He'd been attacked by other inmates early in his sentence, had spent time in protective custody, had been denied parole twice. She felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy about his circumstances, just a kind of hollow indifference. "He died last month," Victoria said gently. "Heart attack. His lawyer reached out to see if you wanted any of his personal effects." Madison absorbed this information with surprising calm. She'd imagined this moment many times over the years, wondering how she'd feel when Connor was truly gone forever. The answer, she discovered, was relief, not joy or vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that chapter was finally, completely closed. "I don't want anything that belonged to him," Madison said, "but thank you for telling me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching people hurry past the cafe windows, business people, tourists, families, all of them carrying their own stories of triumph and struggle. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Madison asked finally. "What?" "That you've never doubted yourself, even when you were little, even when other kids tried to convince you that up was down or black was white. You trusted your own perceptions. That's not something I was able to teach you. It's something you never lost." Victoria smiled. "I think I learned it from watching you rebuild. You spent my entire childhood showing me what it looks like to trust yourself again after someone tries to break that trust." Madison thought about the woman she'd been 18 years ago, broken, isolated, doubting her own sanity. She thought about the long process of rebuilding not just her financial security, but her emotional foundation. Most importantly, she thought about the community of strong women she'd surrounded herself with, people who'd helped her remember who she was beneath Connor's manipulations. "Writing the book is a good idea," Madison said, "but make sure you include the helpers. Amy, Detective Santos, Alex Thompson, even Dr. Park eventually. Connor couldn't have been stopped by one person acting alone. It took a network of people who cared about justice, and people who cared about you specifically." "Yes, that too." As they prepared to leave the cafe, Victoria asked one final question. "Do you ever wonder how different your life would have been if you'd never married Connor?" Madison considered this. She might have married someone else, had children earlier, built a different kind of career. She probably would have been happy in quieter, more conventional ways, but she also wouldn't have learned how strong she was. She wouldn't have built a nonprofit that had helped thousands of women escape financial abuse. She wouldn't have raised a daughter who dedicated her career to prosecuting predators like Connor. "I think everything happened exactly as it was meant to," Madison said finally. "Connor thought he was writing my story, but it turned out he was just one chapter. The rest I wrote myself." Walking back to her car, Madison reflected on the strange circular nature of justice. Connor had tried to erase her, but in fighting back, she had discovered who she really was beneath his manipulations. He'd tried to isolate her, but she'd built a stronger community than she'd ever had before. He'd tried to steal her future, but she'd created a legacy that would outlast them both. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Saw Victoria on the news. So proud of you both. Dinner Sunday." Madison smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." Amy had never married, but she'd become the most devoted aunt Victoria could have asked for. She'd been Madison's anchor through the darkest periods of recovery, and now she was a beloved constant in their lives, the woman who remembered Madison before Connor, who'd helped her find her way back to herself. As Madison drove home to her brownstone in Brooklyn, a neighborhood she'd chosen specifically because it felt nothing like the sterile luxury of her life with Connor, she thought about the conversation she'd have with her son-in-law David that evening. Victoria had inherited Madison's determination and strategic thinking, but David had inherited her capacity for trust and emotional openness. Their marriage was everything Madison's first marriage had pretended to be: genuine partnership, mutual respect, shared dreams built on honest communication. Madison had never remarried. She'd dated occasionally over the years, had even had a few serious relationships, but she'd discovered that she valued her independence too much to give it up for anything less than extraordinary love. And extraordinary love, she'd learned, was rarer than most people wanted to admit. Her nonprofit work had become her greatest passion. The Madison Reynolds Foundation had helped over 10,000 women rebuild their lives after financial abuse, and had lobbied successfully for legislative changes that made it harder for abusers to hide assets and manipulate the legal system. Madison had testified before Congress twice, had been featured on the cover of Time magazine, and had received honorary doctorates from 3 universities. But her proudest achievement was simpler. She'd learned to trust herself completely. When her instincts told her something was wrong, she listened. When someone tried to gaslight her, she recognized it immediately. When opportunities arose, she evaluated them based on her own values rather than seeking external validation. Connor had spent 3 years teaching her to doubt herself. She'd spent the following 18 years remembering why she was worth believing in. That evening, as Madison sat in her garden reading while Victoria's children played nearby, she reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from her trauma. The ability to spot manipulation from miles away, the network of fierce friendships she'd built with other survivors, the unshakable knowledge that she could handle whatever life threw at her. Most importantly, The understanding that strength wasn't about never falling down, it was about getting back up, learning from the experience, and using that knowledge to help others avoid similar traps. Connor Reynolds had tried to write Madison's ending. Instead, he'd helped her discover that she was the author of her own story. And it was turning out to be a much better story than he'd ever imagined possible. Victoria looked up from where she was pushing her daughter on the swing set Madison had installed last year. "Mom, Emma wants to know if you'll tell her the story about the princess who saved herself." Madison smiled, closing her book. It was a story she'd invented for Victoria years ago, and now Victoria told it to her own daughter, a fairy tale about a princess who discovered that she didn't need rescuing because she was brave enough to rescue herself. "Of course," Madison said, opening her arms as 5-year-old Emma ran over. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a beautiful castle." As she began the familiar story, Madison caught Victoria's eye and saw her daughter's quiet pride. They'd both learned the lesson at the heart of the fairy tale: sometimes the most important person to save is yourself. And sometimes, when you do save yourself, you discover you're strong enough to save others too. Connor Reynolds had thought he was destroying Madison's story. Instead, he'd helped her write the most important chapter of all, the one where she learned that no one else could define her worth, control her future, or write her ending. The princess had saved herself, and then she'd built a kingdom where other princesses could learn to do the same. The end. This story is dedicated to every woman who has ever been told she was crazy for trusting her instincts, who has ever been made to doubt her own perceptions, who has ever been punished for refusing to accept someone else's version of reality. Your strength is real. Your voice matters. Your story isn't over. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial abuse, help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233, provides confidential support and resources. You are not alone in us, and you are not powerless.